Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's interactive discussion between Mr. Stephen Schwarzman, the CEO, co-founder, and chairman of Blackstone, and Mr. Nandan Nilekani, the founding chairman of the Unique Identification Authority of India and the chairman and co-founder of Infosys. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time to be here with us today. Today's discussion is going to focus on the transformation of technology in the world and the role of India in this revolutionary journey. The discussion will also draw on anecdotes from Mr. Schwarzman's recently published New York Times bestseller, What It Takes, Lessons in the Pursuit of Excellence. This event will truly be one to remember. To take the event forward, I now...
Steve, it's great to have you here at IIT Bombay, and I think all of them will have a treat listening to you. First of all, let me say that your book is very, very readable, and I think you have been honest, you have put it all out, great anecdotes and great lessons. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, part of it had to do with getting older, and what happens as you learn things yourself over a long period of time. I started our business 35 years ago. You actually make sufficient number of mistakes that you'd like to help other people not make the same mistakes. You may make others, but you shouldn't make the ones we did. And I thought it would be really useful to describe how you get to do things, create things, grow big things, figure out how to interview other people, how to imagine great things and make them happen.
But when you started 35 years back, did you imagine that you would create this phenomenal company, the world's biggest PE firm, multi-class firm?
You know, not really. We had a strategic plan, which to show you our lack of imagination, we're still executing. And the plan was pretty simple. We would first go into the M&A advisory business because you didn't need any capital, and people paid you millions of dollars for talking. So I would recommend to you, if you can talk and have people give you millions of dollars, you should try it. The second thing is we wanted to go into the private equity business, which we did. And the third thing is we wanted to always adapt to new things. And so we set up a concept in our strategic plan called affiliates, where we would go into financial businesses at a time that we thought that particular investment strategy was so easy to be successful that even I could do it. And we had two other criteria. The first is that we'd be able to attract someone who was a 10 out of 10 to run that business, somebody who was a world scale individual. And the second criteria was that the business itself would generate intellectual capital such that it would make our existing businesses stronger. So I guess we were like early in the data business, but we didn't call it data. I call it intellectual capital. And the more of it you have, the easier it is to be successful.
You know, one of the things is that you talked about hiring people who are 10 on 10. And, it's logical to say we should hire people as smart or smarter than ourselves. But in reality, that doesn't happen. And, organizations sort of decline because you hire people less smarter because you're insecure and so on. So you never fell into that trap. You always hired the best. So is that a key to building a great organization, is attracting people as smart as you or smarter than you?
Well, I had a real advantage that when I went to high school, I went to a public high school, and I was in the class for the smart kids. The only problem was I was the least smart kid in the class. So my high school had about 950 people in each grade, and sort of accelerated learners had about 35 to 40 people, and I was always consistently right at the bottom. So even though I ranked pretty well out of 950, that wasn't my relevant set. My relevant set were all these super smart people who probably went to IIT. And so I was always struggling.
That's why you hired people from IIT and
Well, I've gotten lucky, and I've gotten smarter. So I always recognized that other people were smarter than me. And even though I tried as hard as I could, I couldn't beat them. And so I never had any arrogance about maintaining a dominant position. I always felt, judgment-wise, I was quite good. But in terms of raw intelligence, other people were better. So getting all of us together was a winning hand.
You know, one of the great anecdotes in your book, and I haven't heard of anyone else doing this, is that you called up the dean of admission at Harvard College. You were 17 years old. You went to a payphone, put a bunch of coins, and told him that he should give admission in Harvard. So where did you get that confidence as a 17-year-old kid in Philadelphia to call up the dean of admissions to say, you better admit me into Harvard?
Well, I guess I wasn't shy. I really wanted to go to Harvard because at that time, Harvard was regarded as the best school, and I wanted to go to the best school so I could have the best outcome. And unfortunately, I was put on the waiting list, which I thought was a mistake. And so I figure, how do I reverse this? I ought to call the person in charge and let him know that he made an error. So it's very intimidating as a 17-year-old to call the dean of admissions at Harvard. It's like dialing God. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing is you look in the phone book and find out what the phone number is for the admissions department. And I just called it. And they said, who are you, Harvard admissions. And I said, could I talk to Dean, whatever his name was? And they just put me through. So this gentleman picks up the phone, and I announced myself. I said, I'm Steve Schwarzman from Abington High School in Abington, Pennsylvania. And he says, yes. And I said, I'm calling because I think you may have made an error, and I'm on your waiting list, and I think it would be really terrific if I were admitted. And he said, how did you ever get to me? He said, I don't talk to students. And meanwhile, I'm putting these quarters into the phone, which then we didn't have cell phones, yeah. So they were pay phones, and every time you put a quarter in, it would make a noise, like ba-bump, ba-bump. And I thought this was going to be a long conversation, so I had all these quarters in my pocket, only to find out that the dean was not as interested in a long conversation as I was. And he said, well, where else did you get in? I said, well, I got into Yale. He said, well, Yale's a fine school. I'm sure if you go there, you'll have a good time. I said, I'm sure I will too, but that wasn't why I was calling. I wasn't calling for advice. He said, well, the problem is that we've had a very high yield this year, and no one will be getting into Harvard off of the waiting list. So this was a problem I did not know how to overcome. And so he said, I feel really sorry, but I'm sure you'll have a good time at Yale. At which point, I was soaking wet. I was so nervous. The question I was just asked is, what advice do I have for budding entrepreneurs? What I'd say is, just to start out, you have to figure out what you want to do, and is it a big dream? Because if you do little things, you can get caught up in those little things. Secondly, make sure you really think through what the potential is of your idea. When you go out to raise money, which inevitably you have to do not go to your best prospect first. That's the mistake I made. It's the mistake everybody makes. And the reason you don't do that is you don't fully know what you're doing yet either. And they will ask questions that you won't have the answer to the first time. So schedule your best people towards the end and experiment on people you don't know so well. You'll find it surprising that the people you know well won't have much sympathy for you if you haven't thought things through thoroughly. And it's hard to think things through when you don't know what you're doing. So it's the reverse order, which is surprising, and you won't like it because you'll think it'll take you longer. And you could be much more efficient if the first 2 or 3 people solve all your problems. Don't do that.
Will Blackstone continue its current buying acquisition plan, or do you have new plans in the works?
It's a question, will Blackstone continue with its current posture of investing in real estate and buying companies? And the answer is yes. We have a robust pipeline now in terms of expanding our real estate. We're the largest owner of office buildings in India, and we have plans over time to increase that very substantially. In the private equity area, we're always looking for new things. And in the last 18 months, in private equity and real estate together, we've committed $6 billion US dollars here in India. To the extent that the economy stays slower and inflation's higher and the banking system isn't as liquid and extending as much credit as the economy wants, that provides new opportunities for us, because we have at Blackstone about $150 billion that is not invested yet. And so the scale of things here in India it does not represent a challenge. It's really just how interesting are the things that we might be doing. So the fact that the overall tone of the economy isn't as good is not troubling to us. Another question was what is my current outlook for India? I'm not sure because I'm not Indian. I don't live here, and I'm visiting. And the economy has slowed, and the government's done a lot of good policies with tax cuts and other types of stimulation, money for education in a very large way. So all of those are good foundations. I'd say that the financial system needs to deal effectively with the stage in the cycle where the financial institutions are, where they're not as robust as I think everyone would like them to be. The question is, where are we focusing on our real estate business? And we're going to continue to focus on our office portfolio, which is basically oriented to the IT business, continue buying in the mall area, and we'll also be buying in the warehouse area. Those will be our 3 areas of concentration. So somebody asked, most foreign investors aren't interested in India. Why is Blackstone? That's sort of a good question. And we're interested because India has grown enormously and is now the fifth biggest economy in the world. It's going to have the youngest working age cohort in the world. They're becoming better educated. India is making enormous strides in the technology area. And all of these things are really good. Education levels are going to be going up. And these are things that work well with the future. And we've watched India grow dramatically since we've been here in 2006. This is a long-term commitment from Blackstone. And slight downturns in economies and things of that type don't affect us. Our perspective as individual investments is in a 5 to 10 year range, and we have a lot of confidence in the country. Sometimes it's easier to be an outsider rather than live someplace because you feel what happens on a day-to-day basis a lot more.